Good morning, everyone, or whatever is appropriate to your time zone. I hope you're all doing well today. We have lots to cover, and I know you're here to see Nigel, not me. So I'm going to jump right in with a brief introduction of the ICCP, and then I'm going to hand over to the lovely Suzanne for her introduction. And yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So welcome, everyone. So I'm going to begin. Sorry, I'm on the wrong slide. It's a good way to begin. I'll just begin with a brief introduction of the ICCP. Who are we and why do we exist? Well, we are a professional members organization to recognize the skills, qualifications, and expertise needed to professionally manage construction claims. So we are here to establish international standards, to recognize those who meet those standards, and to educate those who are just coming up in the profession. So why do we need the ICCP when there are so many construction organizations already out there? Well, most of those organizations either have a very broad appeal or a very narrow one, and construction claims is an industry that people come to from a lot of different places, from engineering, QSing, project management, wherever they started from, somehow they end up in claims. And until the ICCP was established, there was no institute specifically in existence just for the specialist knowledge, experience, and skills needed to manage, prepare, and respond to claims to the highest level of professionalism. So we do have an elected steering committee. Our executive officer is Andy Hewitt. He's the founder. Our current sitting president is Paul Gibbons. He was elected by the membership. And these three fellows, Christian Ruskopf, Lee Sporl, and Mark Watson, also elected by the membership. Okay, and to become a member, we have 3 levels of individual membership, each of which, as is usual with professional organizations, has their own criteria, education, experience, etc., necessary to meet that level of membership. We also have a corporate level of membership for consultancies or organizations that have a specialist construction claims department. Okay, so why join the ICCP? What's in it for you? Well, we have a private members area with a library of articles and training opportunities. We also have a library of templates that relate to a variety of contracts. We host regular CPD webinars like this one. We have the ICCP Academy, which is a members-only, very technical training. We have a monthly newsletter to keep you up to date. We have a private LinkedIn group where you can discuss your contracts and claims questions in a confidential setting. And of course, the usual benefits of logo and certificate, and an optional listing on our website with your own web page for those who are usually in private practice who want to increase their internet profile. Okay, if you would like to learn more, I know I went through this fairly quickly, please get in touch with me or visit our website, so instituteccp.com or jennifer.smith@instituteccp.com. Okay, and just before I hand over to Suzanne, a little bit of housekeeping. I know you will have questions as you're listening. Please, if you look at the bottom of your screen, you have the option of chat or Q&A. It would really help us if you put your questions in the Q&A, then they are kept separate and they don't get lost in the chat. And I'll be able to ask questions. Nigel has said if you have questions, he will answer them as he goes. And my final thing is we changed the settings for today's webinar. So if you are an ICCP member and you would like a certificate of attendance for your CPD, please email me and I will send you your certificate. okay, because I don't know if I will get that list that I normally get. And with that, I will hand over to Suzanne. Good morning, Suzanne.
Good morning. Thank you, Jen, and good morning to everyone. On behalf of Quantity Surveyors International, I would like to welcome you to this joint event. I'm the business manager. For those of you who don't know QSI, we're a UK-based but global professional body for not only quantity surveyors, but all those involved in the financial aspects of the construction and engineering industry. You can find more details about us on our website at www.theqsi.com. And I just, while I'm thinking about it, would like to add, if any QSI members want certificates, again, to email me. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Nigel to you. Nigel Barr is the Managing Director of the construction management consultancy Stradia, who are based in the UK here. He's a very experienced and highly respected contracts consultant, providing advice on everything from procurement to dispute resolution. He's a leading expert on the NEC, including being a course leader for NEC Contract themselves, who produce the NEC. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Nigel. Thank you.
Okay, shall I share my screen now? Can you see that, guys? Yeah, is it there? Is it up and running?
Yes, we've got it, Nigel.
Right, just a bit of a delay there. I don't know what's happened. Okay, guys. Right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome, as has been said, to this short presentation on the NEC program. As has been said, my name is Nigel Barr, so I'm going to be taking you through this presentation. So I'm going to assume that you've got some knowledge of the NEC. In other words, I'm not going to introduce the contract itself. I'm just going to be talking about the program and how the program works in the contract. I'm going to be looking at it from the point of view as to whether it could be considered a better way of working than, say, programs in other forms of contract and other ways of presenting programs. So let's have a look at this. This is how I'm going to cover this. I'm going to have a look at the requirements of the program under the engineering construction contract, how the program relates to compensation events, which are variations and changes under the contract, and how to manage the program to ensure it becomes accepted by the project manager. So the question then is really that we're looking at is, does the NEC ECT program provide a clearer basis for assessing extensions of time than other contracts? And I've broken this down into kind of 4 parts really. Is the NEC program aligned to recent case law regarding current delays? Is there clarity of information required for a compliant NEC program? Is there clarity on how float and time risk allowance should be dealt with under the program? And also, is there clarity on how the NEC program is to be managed? So a whistle-stop tour of those 4 areas. Let's see what you think. And as Jenny and Suzanne have said, if you do have any questions, then just shout out, put it in the chat box. Sorry, not the chat box, the question box, beg your pardon. Is the NEC program aligned to latest case law? So let's have a look at the latest case law in the UK and just see what that is telling us. So I'm sure you're all aware of the latest position with regard to Saga Cruises and Fincantieri, which is a shipping case, actually, not a construction case. But it's the outcome of the case was very much related to how construction contracts work. And in fact, the approach that Saga came up with was also simultaneously the approach supported by the Society of Construction Law Delay and Disruption Protocol. So let's see how that relates then to the NEC and whether there's any similarity or whether the two work hand in hand. So you might recall from that case that it was all about concurrency, or at least a part of the case was related to concurrency, and was a contractor entitled to recover an extension of time when a delay was considered to be concurrent. So I'm going to show you a few slides with a few pictures on, if you like, which will perhaps easily explain the outcome of that case. So when a delay occurs, it could either be a delay occasioned by the contractor or by an employer. And the problem with concurrent delays is, well, what happens if they both happen at the same time? And is the contractor entitled to an extension of time in that situation? Well, this case, I think, cleared up the issue. And for some people, it was a kind of a good result. Maybe for others, it wasn't. But let's have a look at the outcome. So in situation one, if you like, that's on the screen, if the two delays, the contractor's delay and the employer delay, are running truly concurrently, then under that case, that would entitle the contractor to an extension of time. If there was an overlap period, so the employer delay started before the contractor delay, and there was an overlapping period in the middle, then the contractor would be entitled to an extension of time for both the preceding concurrent delay and the delay during the concurrency. Then having a look at another situation where they both start at the same time, the employer's delay and the contractor's delay both start at the same time, then what's the situation then? Well, in fact, the contractor would be entitled to an extension of time for the period of the employer delay. And finally then, on this, so what happens then if the employer delay starts first, contractor delay starts during the middle of that employer delay, and there is concurrency towards the end of the delay? Well, again, the contractor would be entitled to an extension of time for both those situations. The difficulty then is where the employer delay is subsumed within the contractor delay, and that would mean that the contractor would not be entitled to an extension of time for that delay. So let's see how that relates then to the NEC. Is that the same as the NEC? Does the NEC work in the same way? So here's a very simple NEC program, or at least a program that's got NEC information on it. So what we've got on the screen at the moment then is a basic program with 7 activities showing. So we've got activity 1 to 7. Now, the red line in very simple terms would be the critical path. So each activity that's on the critical path, that would be 1, 3, 5, 6, and 7. If those activities are delayed, then it would delay planned completion under the NEC. Now, planned completion, we'll talk about the terminology in a bit more detail, but planned completion under the NEC is critical when establishing whether the contractor is entitled to additional time. So if there is a delay on activities 1, 3, 5, 6, and 7, then the contractor would be entitled to more time. However, you can see on this program that activity 2 and activity 4 are not on the critical path. In fact, there's float shown on those activities. So a bit of a quick Q&A. Whose float is that? Who does that float belong to? Is it the contractor? Is it the project manager, employer, or is it someone else? Anybody know? See if I can just put an answer in the Q&A box if anybody knows. So, okay. Well, it belongs to whoever needs it first under the NEC contract. So whoever needs that flows first can use it. So if on activity 4, let's say that's a drain runner from A to B, the project manager issues an instruction to install an additional access chamber. That takes 1 week of that float. If there is enough time in that float to absorb that instruction, then obviously the contractor is not delayed and therefore there will be no extension of time. However, under the NEC contract, if that part of the works was already in delay, so let's say the drain run was in delay, the ground worker was in delay, that float had been used up, then along comes the project manager, issues exactly the same instruction, this time under the NEC contract. Because the float is now gone, then that would delay plan completion, which would entitle the contractor to more time. So the NEC is very much about a living program that has to be kept up to date at all times, and I'll explain that in more detail shortly. And depending at the moment the instruction is given or the compensation event is notified, we look to see what the latest accepted program is showing, and if there is float, then whoever needs it first can use it. And that's kind of one of the principles of the contract under clause 63.5. However, we've got on this little program, we're showing terminal float, so planned completion before the completion date. Now the situation differs here. That float belongs to the contractor. So if the contractor is showing an early completion, or indeed is showing planned completion later than the completion date, so negative terminal float, that belongs to the contractor. So any interruption, any delays caused by compensation events under the contract that delay planned completion, if it moves planned completion, it moves the completion date by the same amount. So the contractor keeps the either positive terminal float or negative terminal float. And finally, just another little bit before we have a look at some worked examples. The contract requires float to be shown, by the way. That's a requirement of the contract. And also that it's a requirement of the contract to show time risk allowance. So if the contractor feels that there is a risk that has a significant chance of occurring, they build that into the program and they show that on the program, and that belongs to the contractor. That's the contractor's time that is built into the program. It's as if it was real time, if you like. Of course, it's in relation to any risks that may occur. So here we have a little example. We have two sets of activities, A to C and D to E, and their activities D, E and E are showing 3 weeks float. Now, which of those is on the critical path? Well, the red ones, of course, A, B and C. They're driving planned completion. So on activities D to F, there is some float there. So those activities D to F could be delayed by up to 3 weeks before they delay planned completion. So again, this is absolutely vital and important when we're talking about NEC contracts. So along comes a compensation event, which is 2 weeks. That has to be completed before activity D can commence. So what is going to happen? Well, that's going to absorb 2 weeks of the float. So we're down to 1 week of float now. Now, when we assess that compensation event, when we look at the impact of that, clearly the cost effect of the additional work, so if that was an instruction to carry out some additional work, then the cost effect of that would form the basis of the quotation for the compensation event. But because it hasn't interfered with the completion, planned completion, then there is no time implication. So that compensation event will just be for money only. That program then will be submitted and accepted by the project manager, and then we move on. Okay, so this time in this example, following that accepted program, the contractor has fallen into delay on activity F. And instead of that activity taking 3 weeks, it's now going to take 5 weeks. So what's going to happen? Well, what's going to happen is it's going to push planned completion out, but it's not going to impact on the completion date because the contractor has fallen into delay on that activity. Now, the compensation event came first, so that took 2 weeks of the float. Unfortunately for the contractor in this example, their delay came after the compensation event. Therefore, the delay would not, the delay to planned completion in this example would not move the completion date because it was the contractor was in culpable delay. So we're starting to see now how this works, and I'll build up to seeing how a concurrent delay might work. So, okay, so that now the critical path has now moved from A, B, C to D, E, and F. So the critical path has moved, and this has now generated 1 week's worth of float on activity A, B, and C. So that float now will be available to, again, whoever needs it first. So this is one of the really key NEC principles, and I've And I think, and I'm putting my views in here, but I think that's a really clear way of dealing with it. Unlike some contracts, such as the JCT contracts and ICE contracts, where we don't have any clarity on how we do these things, we just apply our logic, if you like, our planning logic, but the contract doesn't really necessarily support that. But in the NEC, it does. So another scenario here where we have a delayed start on activity D. So activity D now is, instead of starting at week 0, has now started at the end of week 2. So that has meant that because the contractor is in delay, they've used 2 weeks of their float, which means there's only 1 week of float left. That program is submitted under the contract for acceptance. And again, I'll explain that process shortly. Now, having fallen into delay, having the situation where we've now got reduced float on activities D, E, and F, along comes another compensation event, this time 2 weeks. This work has to be completed before activity F can commence. So now what's going to happen? Well, now what's going to happen is it's going to push planned completion out by a week, and it's also going to move the completion date out by a week as well, because this time the contractor's delay came first, followed by the compensation event, the delay caused by the project manager or the client, you could say. So again, clarity, which came first, and in this case, the contractor's delay came first. They took advantage of that float. The compensation event followed. So again, now we've generated another week's worth of float on activity A, B, and C. And for me, again, I think that's a really clear way of dealing with it. So this is where it gets a little bit more interesting. So we've got, again, activities A, B, and C, D, E, and F. And this time, we've still got the, we've still got the 3 weeks worth of floats there. And what we're looking at now is what happens if that gets ahead of program. So I'll come back to that slide, the previous slide I just skipped over in a minute. Activity A now, instead of taking 4 weeks, has taken 3 weeks, which means that the other activities, A and B, the follow-on activities can start earlier. So now what happens is that we've brought that forward and we've generated something called terminal float. So the contractor now is going to finish 1 week early. So what we do with the NEC, which I'll flick back to this slide here, is what we're looking at when we prepare a quotation for a compensation event, is that we're looking at what's called the dividing date. And this is key. This is under clause 63(1) in the contract. The dividing date is the date upon which the instruction was given or the compensation event was notified. And that is a moment in time. And this is where we start to now think about concurrency, because the NEC recognizes that whichever delay came first, whether it's a delay caused by a compensation event or a delay caused by the contractor, we put a flag up against the one that came first. That one is impacted into the program, followed by the next one. So it would be very unusual if 2 delays happened exactly at the same minute. 3 or 4 delays might happen in a day, but you take them in chronological order. So it's very, very, very unlikely you would have true concurrency in an NEC contract, because it recognizes whichever came first is impacted into the program. So what we do is we take the latest accepted program. So the latest accepted program might have been, let's have a look, the 1st of November. We're now on the 4th of November. So we take the program that was accepted on the 1st of November. We update it to the 4th of November. We take account of any delays or any problems that have occurred. We update that program to the 4th of November. We drop, if today was the dividing date, we then drop the the instruction or the compensation event into the program and see what effect it has. So it's very much a real-time method of working, a real-time method of establishing entitlement for additional time. Now, it does demand that the program is kept up to date, that to do this properly, you cannot you cannot do these little kind of assessments unless you have an up-to-date program. So it's really important. And one of the key messages, the takeaways from today, if you take away anything, is that program is so important. It must be kept up to date. The contractor submits those programs, the project manager accepts them. And we'll come on to how that works shortly. So in this little example now, we've generated a week's terminal float because of activity A getting ahead of program. That belongs to the contractor. So if another compensation event occurs, as we have in this diagram here, which is going to take 1 week, well, I think you can all guess what's going to happen because the contractor owns the terminal float. It's going to, that compensation event has to be completed before activity C can start. So what's it going to do? Well, it's going to move planned completion out by a week, and it's going to move the completion date out by a week. So the contractor keeps that terminal float. So you can imagine that, let's say we've had a great summer, unusual, but let's say we've had a great summer. The contractor has managed to get ahead of program. You know, they've been able to take advantage of the good weather and the long days and such like that. They've got ahead of program. They keep that. They keep that terminal float. It belongs to them. So clearly that it's in the contractor's interest to make sure that that program is up to date and showing that terminal float that is built up, so that that's protected. Unlike other contracts where, for example, in the JCT contract, if the contract administrator is looking to grant an extension of time under pressure from the contractor, what the contract administrator will do is see whether the delay impacts on the completion date. And if it doesn't impact on the completion date, there'll be no extension of time. Under this contract, which I think is better and fairer for contractors, if you are ahead of program, you keep that terminal float. Conversely, if you are behind program, so in other words, you're showing planned completion later than the completion date, and I'm sure you've been involved, guys, in projects which have overrun. So that happens. So if a project is overrunning, i.e. the contractor is in culpable delay, then that stays the same. So if there's a delay again to planned completion caused by a compensation event or by any other interference, if there's a delay caused by a compensation event, it will move planned completion and the completion date out if it is a compensation event. So the negative terminal float will also stay the same. So it's not a situation where the contractor can say, well, I'm in delay, I accept that, but you've now issued an instruction, project manager, whilst I'm in culpable delay, therefore you have to grant me some more time up to when I finish that additional work you've asked me to do. This contract doesn't work like that. It's much clearer. There's no potential for a claim, if you like, in that situation. So the second point then, is there clarity of information required for a compliant program? So is the contract clear on what is actually required from the contractor and indeed from the project manager when it comes to accepting a program? So there is a list, if you like, of items, a specification for a program in the contract. So again, unlike other contracts that leave it largely to the parties to decide what needs to be shown in a program, this contract is very prescriptive. It gives you a lot of detail under clause 31.2 as to what needs to be included. So we have a starting date. We have access dates, and some of you, you'll probably notice that some words are written in italics. Now, if we were together, I'd be chatting to you about all that. Let's just tell you quickly what it means. So starting date is, well, let me just tell you first of all that where you see words in italics, it means that something needs to be completed in contract data. So, so something needs to be completed in contract data wherever you see words written in italics. And I'm going to come on to explain the significance of all these dates in a minute. So you can see starting date and access dates, those will be specific dates entered into the contract. We have key dates, we have a completion date, we have planned completion. All of these things need to be included in a compliant program. It has to show the order and timing of the works, the logic links, the sequencing, if you like, the dependencies all need to be shown. And that's, of course, where we start to see float appearing. It has to show the float. We can't hide the float. And I always say to contractors and project managers, just make sure you show the program as it is. It's not going to work if you try and manipulate the program and try and, if you like, anticipate what's going to happen and try and hide float. It just is going to make a mess of it. So, to use a term, play a straight bat and just show it as it is. So when you look out the cabin window, you see what is going on, and that's reflected exactly on that program. And of course, if you're doing any forensic work with the program, then it should also have shown exactly what did happen, not what you would like it to show. Health and safety requirements need to be shown on there, any procedures set out in the contract, any acceptances, so that would be maybe design acceptances or acceptance for subcontractors coming onto site, things like that would need to be shown on there. It has to be accompanied by other documents such as method statements and any other information that the scope requires. The scope in NEC4 is what used to be works information in NEC3. And the program also has to be in the form stated in the scope. So if the scope calls for the program to be submitted in P6 or Asta PowerPoint or any other software package, then you have to do that. The contractor must do that. And of course, that means then that when the contractor provides the program to the project manager for acceptance, uploads it, the PM can open it and the PM can test the logic links and make sure the program stands up. Also, we can state in there, for example, how we want to show time risk allowance. If we have a particular way in which we'd like to show time risk allowance, the scope can dictate that. The scope can actually state those kind of details. So what do we mean by accepted program? So I mentioned a few times that the program has to be updated to be able to do this analysis, to be able to assess compensation events. So the program is submitted regularly. The program is either provided, the first program is either provided with contract data part 2, which is the contractor's tender, or if there's no program provided with contract data part 2, the program then is submitted within so many weeks after the contract date. And that, again, that period of time is stated in the contract. So the contractor has to provide either a program with their tender, or if not, then within so many weeks of the starting, so at the contract date, which will be in the actual contract itself. And that will be different for different projects. So this is a living document. Thereafter, the program has to be updated, and it's updated at the interval stated in contract data. So again, if it's a fast track complex project, then we might want programs every 2 weeks or even every week, we being the project manager stroke client. If it's less complex, then typically that might be a 4-week period. But that program needs to be submitted, assessed by the project manager and accepted. And if we've got any project managers on the line, any client side project managers, then again, make sure we do that. And I'll come on to the effects of not doing it and what will happen then. So just to highlight the importance of that first program, the contract states that under clause 53, that if that first program is not submitted, so there's not one with the tender, and there isn't one submitted within the timescale stated in contract data part 1, so we don't have a first program, then the project manager, the client if you like, can withhold 1 quarter of all payments until that first program is submitted. So for me, that kind of really underlines the importance of this program. It's a really important document. It's kind of the central plank, if you like, to operating this contract. And if we do operate it correctly, if we do use it as it's intended, I can say from experience, I've been involved in the NEC for well over 25 years, that it does make life easier. It makes sure that quotations, compensation events are assessed quickly and effectively, and hopefully that gives us a really good basis to ensure that it doesn't interrupt with cash flow and other problems that we have on construction projects. So there we go. And it has to be submitted showing the information. So that first program has to be submitted showing the information that the contract requires. It's not just a case of submitting a program and that gets us off the hook, as it were. So coming on to project dates in the contract, I've mentioned a few already. So the contract does require certain contract dates to be included. So the contract date in this contract is the date when the contract comes into existence, the date it is signed. The starting date is unusual. This is different from most other contracts. Surprisingly, the starting date is not the date you start on site. The starting date is when the contractor's obligations begin under the contract. So that might include some prefabrication work that's going on, some offsite construction, some mobilization, some design. So the programs all start from the starting date. The access dates are the dates when the contractor can actually walk through the site gates. There may be several access dates, access to Area A, Area B, Area C. And as you can see, as I mentioned earlier, they're in italics. So they're dates that are specifically written into the contract in contract data part 1. And there can, as I say, be more than one access date. Those have to be shown on the program. Completion date. Well, that's the contractual completion date. That's when the contractor is obliged to complete. The contractor complete on or before the completion date. And of course, again, that's going to be identified in contract data. If the client is specifying or stating the completion date, obviously it goes in contract data part 1, but it might be that the contractor is invited to tender a completion date, in which case it goes in contract data part 2. And that can only be changed, or those contract completion dates can only be changed by compensation events. The project manager has no power to change the completion date. It has to be done through a compensation event. So in other words, the power to change it comes through the compensation event. So key dates, unusual thing in the NEC. Key dates also have to be shown on the program. And these, if you're not familiar with the NEC, are quite unusual. They are dates when, dates used for coordination of what the client wants to do and what the contractor is doing. So to give you an example, let's say the client wants a cable in position on a certain date, ready for connection by another contractor. That would be a key date, so that it would state the condition in contract data part 1 that cable needs to be in position ready for connection on the 1st of December. The contractor has to work to that key date. If that key date is missed, then the contractor could be facing and will be facing any costs the employer has been put to in that key date being missed. Another example might be the client wants a concrete base ready for a piece of equipment that they're bringing to site to be dropped into position. So that again would be an example of a key date. So again, I think the NEC brings some real clarity there about how we coordinate what the client wants to do with what the contractor is doing. These key dates are not completion dates. They are not handover. They're not takeover. They are just used for coordinating work and between the employer or the client, others, and the contractor. And they may be changed, and the PM does have the power to change a key date. And if that key date is changed, then again, you can imagine it's going to become a compensation event. But these key dates have to be shown on the program for acceptance. The defects date is not actually a date at all. The defects date is a period of time, and this runs from completion with a capital C, a defined term, and it's a period of time that runs to the end of what we would normally call the defects period, so typically 52 weeks. And completion is when the contractor has done all things that are required by the scope, which is basically the specification, the drawings, any constraints, all that is included in there, including any identified work that the contractor is to design. So that's all contained in the scope document. And of course, the project manager will want to check on completion whenever the contractor notifies it complete, that all these things have been completed, and then after that, once completion certificate is issued, any defects that are notified have to be completed within what's called the defects correction period. It's a period of time, again, stated in contract data part 1, and the contractor has to follow that timescale. So I'd be interested to just be thinking about this, guys. Do you think this is clear? So as we go through this, if you think that's not as clear as it could be, let's raise a question and have a chat about that shortly. So is there clarity on how float and time risk allowance is dealt with when delays occur? So apologies for this, it's not a great slide, but this is just a screenshot of a part of a program. So you can see the activities there, some sample activities. You can see start date, completion date, you can see the duration, and down the very middle column, you can see time risk allowance. So in the column running down the center there, you've got time risk allowance. So for example, on the gabion retaining walls, 15 days. Within that 15 days, we've got 1 day time risk allowance. You can see that we have the equipment, called equipment in NEC, plant to most of us. Then you can see the operatives, the resources, the people involved in that. What I didn't say, as part of the program for acceptance, there has to be method statements, resource schedules. So it's not just the Gantt chart. In this particular Gantt chart, this particular program, it's showing that information on the program itself. So when the project manager, when the contractor is putting forward their quotation for a compensation to be assessed, then they will use that information, not only the Gantt chart, they'll use that information to make a proper assessment of entitlement for that quotation, for that compensation event. So again, it takes out the mystery as to what we need to include in our relevant matter, if you like, if it's JCT or whichever form of contract that you're familiar with. So there you can see the float showed on a program. So the black lines extending beyond the program, that's your float. So those activities can be delayed up to a point. They can be delayed up to a point before they become critical, and that's shown on the black lines. So the links, then, it's important that the logic links are shown in the program, because the links will tell us where the float is. I do have contractors in particular saying, I think it would be sensible if we didn't show the float, we just show all the activities in kind of running to the end of the float, and no float shown. Because if we do that, they say, then if there is any delays, then everything is on the critical path. But clearly, if you try and do that, the program won't make any sense. It won't tie up with your resources. It'll just be clearly it just would not work. And I'm sure any competent project manager would not accept that program. So there are different types of float, of course. There are there's free float, total float, and time risk allowances and terminal float. And we'll just quickly remind you all of what we're talking about. So total float is the amount of time which a single activity can be delayed before it delays the following activity. And free float is the amount of time immediately following the activity. So I'm going to skip past that. So float is available to accommodate any compensation events, as we said before. It's also available to the contractor to deal with any delays the contractor is suffering. Terminal float, as we said before, is float at the end of the program, showing that either the contractor is going to finish early or they're going to overrun. So that's what we have in that situation. And that terminal float belongs to the contractor. It's their time. They keep that. So, is there clarity on how the program is to be managed? So we've talked so far about some of the principles within the program. We've talked about how we deal with delays. We've talked about the fact that it's very, very unlikely you'll have a concurrent delay if we are assessing the delays as they happen. So as I said before, the fact that a delay happened at 11 o'clock in the morning and then the PM issued an instruction at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we drop that delay into the program at 3 o'clock in the morning or whatever, and so on. So it's just a case of taking account of the sequence of how the delays occurred. So how is the program managed? Well, I mentioned before that the first program is submitted either with contract data part 2, the contractor's tender, or it's submitted so many weeks after the contract date. Thereafter, the programs have to be revised and updated at the intervals stated in contract data part 1. So there's going to be a regular submission of that program. And that updated program then has to show what has happened since the last accepted program. So it's updating actual progress. So if there have been delays or there's been compensation events, they are shown on the program for acceptance. There is a bit of a debate about how much detail that you go into, and we'll perhaps talk about that in a minute. So if there are any delays, that has to be explained with the program. So in other words, how the contractor is going to deal with any delays that the program is now showing, which again is sensible. The project manager then receiving that program, that latest program, will have details of how the delay will be mitigated or potentially reduced altogether. And any other changes that the contractor proposes to make going forward. If they're going to change the sequencing of the works in any way, then that will also be shown on the program for acceptance. And of course, it's up to the contractor to show, they have an obligation to complete by the completion date. So they can change the sequencing in any way that they want in order that completion date is achieved. So,
sorry, just before you move on, we had a question.
Yeah.
The question is, a contractor submits a program, but it is overtaken by events while the project manager is still reviewing it. Does he reject it or accept it? What is the best logical relationship when linking activities?
So, okay. The project manager will obviously receive the program, let's say on the 1st of November. As the program, the project manager has 2 weeks to assess that program under the contract. Now, obviously, the project manager wants to ensure that that program is as accurate as possible. So if at that time, there's something happening which has happened subsequent to the program being submitted, there's something that's fallen into delay or something has happened that impacts on that program, then the project manager will take that into account when assessing that program. That program needs to be as accurate as it can be. So therefore, in my view, it's better that rather than take up to 2 weeks, the project manager deals with it as quickly as possible. So don't wait 2 weeks and then see what happens. Deal with it quickly, because events will be happening, on a daily basis. That program will need to be up to date. It doesn't really matter that things are happening, and the PM can then take that into account when the PM is assessing that program at that moment in time. That's a really good question, actually. So it's not a case of winding the clock back and to the day when the program was submitted to the PM and then saying what's happened at that point. It needs to be, if there's something's happened that the PM knows about, the PM can take that into account in that program. That program then becomes the latest accepted program, and when a compensation event occurs after that program has been accepted, then, as I said before, we go back to that accepted program and we update it for anything that's happened in the interim. So let's say that program might have been submitted to the PM on the 28th of October. The PM accepted it on the 2nd of November and took into account little bits of things that had happened between the 28th of October and the 2nd of November. That's fine, that's no problem. And then a compensation event happens on the 15th of November, let's say. So what you're going to do is take the latest accepted program, which was the 2nd of November, you impact anything that's happened since that program right up to the 15th of November, and then you look at the impact of that compensation event on the 15th of November. So it does not matter that the PM has taken account of some activities, some things that have happened since the date the program was submitted to that person, that PM, for acceptance. So really good question. The program is to represent what is going on site. That's the absolute critical, fundamental thing about the program. So there was some debate. Some of you might be familiar with NEC4. NEC4 had been changed when we had NEC4 changed some of the things that were NEC3. So one of the things that was changed was that it used to say that the contractor had to show implemented compensation events on their program. It now doesn't say that anymore. And plenty of discussion as to why it doesn't say that, but the bottom line is it doesn't say that because it can show implemented compensation events, it can show notified compensation events, it could even show notified early warnings. So the program represents what is happening. It was too restrictive in NEC3 because it kind of implied that you only showed implemented compensation events and not notified ones. So they said before, the program is submitted at the intervals stated in contract data, and the contractor may be required to submit further programs on top of that. So if the PM wants to instruct another program because things are changing rapidly, so let's say the intervals in the contract data are 4 weeks, and in the middle of that 4 weeks, the PM is thinking, do you know what, I could do with another program. The PM can instruct another program. The contractor can submit them more regularly than the interval stated in the contract. So if things are happening, dramatically changing quickly, then perhaps more programs will need to be required. And incidentally, the contractor submits a program with each compensation event quotation so that the quotation is accompanied by a program at that time to demonstrate the contractor's entitlement to an extension of time. It's not a program for acceptance, it's simply a program for helping or assisting the PM in understanding the contractor's entitlement. And incidentally, if the PM does not accept the program, it doesn't mean that the contractor stops work. It means the contractor still proceeds with the works, but obviously the PM needs to get that program sorted out. And if the program is not accepted by the PM, then the PM must give reasons to the contractor as to why that program is not accepted. So if the program is not accepted, the PM states why it's not. And NEC4 calls for not just a sort of simple, reason such as it doesn't show the information the contract requires. You then have to go on and say what information is missing, which piece of information exactly are missing from that program. So the program, as I said before, the project manager has 2 weeks to accept that program. If now under NEC4, if the PM does not come back to the contractor within 2 weeks, then the contractor can notify the PM that no reply has been received. The PM gets a further week, and then if no response is received after a week, that program is treated as accepted. So that becomes the accepted program upon which compensation events will be based. So for PMs listening to this, make sure you get that program accepted by you, not by default. Otherwise, you're going to find you're working to a program that may not be, exactly representative of what's happening on the site. So do not let that happen, I would suggest. So, of course, do it as quickly as possible, to the point we've just made from the person who asked the last question, that making sure that program is accepted quickly. You've got 2 weeks, but remember, 2 weeks on a busy construction site, a lot can be happening. So don't wait. Look at the program submitted by the contractor at that time, deal with it so that you don't need to be sort of amending it for what's happened since it's been submitted to you. Otherwise, it's going to get complicated. Now, I'm just lastly going to show you a quick photograph. This is just kind of how I like to work. You can call it a collaborative approach, and Suzanne and others will know that I'm a great believer in collaborative working. So this is at the end of the progress meeting here. We've got, this is a little kind of discussion, if you like, about accepting the program. So you've got the contractor's planner at the front here. He has got the program on his laptop. It's projected up on the screen here. We've got the project manager at the back of the room here. We've got the site supervisor. We've got the contractor's team. And they're going through the program that's been submitted for acceptance in detail. So, questions about, is that earthworks on time? Was that concrete being laid? Is that compensation event going to interrupt progress? Et cetera, et cetera. So they're drilling into that draft program before it's submitted for acceptance. And for me, that's a really, really good way of dealing with it. So when everybody says, yeah, that's perfect, I think that's exactly how it should be. That program works. The PM accepts it, the contractor's planner uploads it to everyone's laptop. We've got the latest accepted program. And this could follow every, progress meeting, or if, or perhaps more regular than that if needs be. Now, obviously, there's a lot of people in the room there, and you can see it's a collaborative. Workshop, because if you look in the middle of the table there, we've got the chocolate hobnobs. So that all helps the process of getting the program accepted. Okay, guys. So I think we're just about at 9 o'clock. I'm not going anywhere at the moment. So if you've got any questions, any points you want to raise, any points of discussion, then just put it in the question box. But my question to you while you're thinking about that is, do you think the NEC program will help avoid disputes? Do you think it's any clearer than any other way of working? What do you think, guys? Do you think it's a better way of dealing with program management? Or is it going to take some claims work away from you? Any questions, any points?
Thank you so much, Nigel. I wonder if you have answered everyone's questions before they thought them.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if you do have any questions or points you want to raise, you can always drop me an email, and then I can answer those for you, or you can always give me a ring. No problem. Right, so I'm in the UK, so obviously you need to add +44 if you're ringing from overseas. So here's a point. Really helpful talk. Many thanks. No problem, Keith. Works very well, where all the parties are familiar with it. The collaborative approach is essential. Agree with that, Nick. Absolutely right. It is a collaborative way of working.
Yeah, that looks like everybody. I don't think we've, oh no, somebody's just popped through. Oh, great talk. Thank you.
Okay, good stuff. Well, I enjoyed that. Thank you very much for your participation today, guys, and I hope you have an enjoyable day. But if you want a copy of the slides, then if you, again, drop me an email, I think they're going to put the details in on the website. I'll forward them to you.
Thank you so much, Nigel. Thank you for taking the time to meet with us today. And obviously, you spoke with great clarity. I don't think I've ever had a situation where we didn't have a flurry of questions. Yes, a final comment. Thank you for the useful webinar.
Okay.
And thank you.
No problem at all. Take care.
Thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye. Bye.